You are not a tourist in time. You stand at the edge of a village, but you are not welcome. You hear no screams, only the rustle of wind through forgotten robes and the soft rattle of a belted to the wrist of someone, no longer considered human. They walk past you with hollow eyes, flesh fading like parchment in rain. Children once kissed by their mothers, now live exiled behind walls built not of stone, but of fear and silence and shame. They are not dead, but they are not alive. And as you watch them vanish into the valley below, you begin to understand. Leprosy did not only rot the body, it rotted the soul of the society that feared it. Welcome to a time when mercy was rare, and the living were buried long before death. If what you're about to hear unsettles you, not with horror, but with quiet recognition, then consider subscribing to Plague Historians. This isn't history as spectacle. It's memory as ritual, a soft exhuming of truths the world chose to forget. If this story lingers with you after the final word, leave a like. If it echoes in silence, share it, so that the forgotten may, at last, be remembered. The year is 1179. You are in France, perhaps Rouen, or Tours, or the outer edge of Paris itself. The bells of the church toll not for a funeral, but for a council. Inside, bishops murmur about sin, disease, and divine punishment. Outside, a man walks the road in silence, cloaked in rags, with a clapper in his hand, not to beg for food, but to warn others to keep their distance. You watch him pass. You do not know his name. Only the label society has stamped on his flesh. Leper. You are not here for spectacle. You are here because the world once decided that a disease slow, misunderstood, and terrifying was reason enough to exile the living as if they were already dead. For centuries, leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease, haunted the margins of civilization. Though its origins trace back to ancient times, India, Egypt, and Chinite's shadow grew long and dark in medieval Europe. It wasn't just an illness, it was a sentence, a symbol, a moral judgment etched into skin. Between the 11th and 14th centuries, leprosy became one of the most feared conditions in the Christian West. It disfigured, it lingered, and because no one understood how it spread, fear filled the void. It was easily clean air to cast the afflicted out. You would see it in papal decrees. In the construction of leprosariathos, isolated colonies meant to be part hospital, part prison. You would hear it in sermons that called the afflicted the walking dead. You would smell it in the rot of forgotten limbs and the burning herbs scattered by physicians desperate to purify the air. But if you stood close enough, if you dared, you would also see something else. Humanity. The hand that still reached for a loved one. The mother who rocked her child through bandaged arms. The eyes that still searched for light beyond the veil of decay. Leprosy did not kill quickly. It did not spread like fire. Its devastation was intimate nerve by nerve, year by year. And so, the stories of those who lived with it are not tales of explosive pandemics. They are stories of slow erasure, of names disappearing from parish rolls, of faces hidden behind veils, of people made ghosts before their breath had stopped. You are not a historian here. You are a witness. You will walk with the banished, sit beside their fire, feel the weight of centuries' worth of misunderstanding press against your chest, and you will remember. The disease may have withered bodies, but it was fear that truly disfigured the world. You are standing outside the gates of a leprosarium. The year is 1125, and the air smells of limewash and sanctified ash. A priest clutches a vial of holy water, flanked by villagers clutching herbs. The man before them, his skin marked with pale blotches, his hands curled from the slow invasion of nerves, does not cry. He doesn't beg. He kneels. And you watch as the ritual begins. He is not being healed. He is being buried alive. The rite is grimly familiar. A liturgy once reserved for the dead, now recited over the living. A black shroud may be placed upon him. He may lie prostrate, while the priest circles with incense. And when he rises again, he is no longer part of the world. Not truly. His clothes are changed. A bell or clapper is tied to his wrist. A sign is fixed to his body or cloak. unclean. From this moment forward, he is a leper, not a man. Leprosy's rise in medieval Europe was not sudden. Traces of the disease existed as far back as the Roman Empire, but it was the 11th century that marked a turning point. Wars, particularly the Crusades, brought returning soldiers and pilgrims into contact with new pathogens, and as trade expanded, so did disease. But while the biological spread was gradual, the social response was swift and brutal. The idea of isolating the afflicted wasn't born in Europe. Ancient Hindu texts and early rabbinical laws had long described lepers as ritually impure, advocating separation. But in the Christian Middle Ages, leprosy took on a uniquely theological weight. It wasn't just a disease of the flesh, it was a disease of the soul, a mark of sin, a living punishment. You begin to notice the signs of this belief in every town you pass. In France, more than 0 leprosaria are established by the 13th century, alone vast networks of quarantine, supported by both church and crown. England follows suit. In Germany, they are known as Siechenhäuser. In Italy, lazaretti, a name later given to plague hospitals, first housed those afflicted by leprosy. Though conditions varied, the principle was the same: separation. The fear is not unfounded. Leprosy, caused by the Mycobacterium leprae bacterium, can lead to severe disfigurement, nerve damage, blindness, and muscle weakness. But it is not highly contagious. It spreads slowly, through prolonged close contact, and most people have a natural immunity. None of this is known to you. To you, the sight of a withered nose, of fingers turned to stubs, of feet dragged along dirt roads, is enough to stir dread. You do not question whether you can catch it. You simply back away. That fear becomes law, and law becomes ritual. In some regions, lepers are required to live outside city walls, at least 6 feet away from the nearest healthy person. In others, they must carry windward, so that their breath does not drift toward others. In a few towns, the mere act of entering a marketplace by a leper is grounds for public flogging or exile. But within the leprosarium, a parallel world is unfolding. You step inside. Here, the sounds are quieter. There are no children laughing, no merchants shouting, just the soft rustle of linen bandages, the muttered prayers of monks who serve without touching. There are gardens, because the outside world offers no employment. There are chapels, because heaven may be the only place left that offers welcome. There is music, sometimes slow, somber, beautiful. Contrary to popular myth, not all lepers were utterly forsaken. Some leprosaria received generous donations, even royal patronage. In England, the Hospital of St. Mary Magdalene in Winchester flourished under King Henry III. In France, the Maison des Malades near Paris was supported by the Crown and the Church. Within their walls, lepers formed communities. They elected leaders, they held ceremonies, they married. But the isolation left scars. You learn of those who attempted to hide their illness, masking the early signs with makeup or long gloves, those who fled their towns rather than face denunciation, those who were turned away by their own families, their names stricken from inheritance rolls, their memories slowly erased. Even death was different. A leper might be buried not in the town cemetery, but in a separate, often unconsecrated plot. Their grave might be marked not by a name, but by a warning: "Let no man disturb this soil." In the eyes of society, they had already crossed into the realm of the dead. But not all forgot them. You witness a woman, perhaps a sister, perhaps a lover leave, a loaf of bread at the edge of a leprosarium wall. She does not knock, she does not speak, but she returns each week, like a ritual, like a vow. Fear may have built the walls, but it is love that walks their edges. And over time, you begin to see the truth that the world refused. The leper is not a monster. He is not cursed. He is not dead. He is simply ill. And he is still human. You are kneeling in a chapel lit only by candles, the air heavy with frankincense. But you do not pray for your own soul. You are here for another. A man who once sat beside you at market now sits apart, his body wasting, his voice hoarse, his presence treated as contagion. The priest whispers that it is not just his flesh that is sick. It is his spirit. And suddenly, you understand. Leprosy is no longer just a disease. It is a judgment. In the medieval imagination, illness did not occur by chance. Every fever, Every swelling, every affliction had a moral root, and no disease carried a heavier moral burden than leprosy. While the bubonic plague was a punishment from God, leprosy was something worse, a punishment that had already been earned. This idea had deep theological roots. The Bible mentions leprosy dozens of times, though what it describes is likely a range of skin diseases, not necessarily Hansen's disease. In Leviticus 13, those with unclean skin are commanded to live outside the camp. In 2 Chronicles, King Uzziah is struck with leprosy for daring to burn incense in the temple, defying divine order. By the 12th century, preachers and theologians drew clear connections. Leprosy was the external manifestation of internal corruption. It was not enough to say that a person had sinned. The disease made that sin visible, legible, undeniable. You remember hearing sermons that speak of pride being punished with skin rot, of lust rotting the genitals, of greed deforming the hands. A poetic justice carved into the body. And those who suffered? They were often encouraged to accept their fate not as victims, but as living martyrs. You walk through a village near Chartres, France, and find a copy of a popular 13th century sermon. Just as Christ bore the wounds of mankind, so too does the leper carry the sins of the world on his body. Some saw lepers as damned, others saw them as Christ-like. Both views led to the same outcome, separation. And that separation was ritualized in ways both haunting and theatrical. In some places, the leper was formally declared dead. A priest might read a burial mass over a still-breathing man. He would be led to a grave, sometimes even required to step into it before being brought to the leprosarium, never to return. A symbolic death followed by social excommunication. In England, documents called leper licenses sometimes granted permission to beg or live within certain boundaries. These were not acts of kindness. They were tools of containment, as if society was trying to manage not just a disease, but a kind of heresy. And you begin to see the strange paradox. Lepers were feared, but also fetishized. Pitied but also punished. Treated as contagious but embraced in sermons as holy sufferers. Some even sought the disease. You hear whispers of men and women who believed that contracting leprosy was a form of divine cleansing. In hagiography, estuaries of saints' lepers were often the vehicle for spiritual testing. Would you kiss the leper's sores? The stories ask. Would you embrace what the world rejects? St. Francis of Assisi famously claimed his conversion began when he embraced a leper on the road. In that moment, the man he once saw as grotesque became a symbol of grace. But you know this is not how most people live. You pass lepers living under bridges, feeding themselves with makeshift ladles to avoid touch. You see children scream at the sound of clappers. You hear mothers whisper threats. If you don't behave, the leper will come for you. This fear seeps into law. Medieval city charters often banned lepers from owning property, entering churches, testifying in court. In some towns, their presence was permitted only on certain days, during certain hours, at certain distances. They were not merely separated, they were unpersoned. And yet, inside some monastic communities, a different theology grew. You visit the order of St. Lazarus Knights who tended to lepers, many of whom were lepers themselves. Founded in the 12th century, the order spread through France, Italy, and the Holy Land, treating the sick not as objects of shame, but as brothers. Here, you see men wearing armor over bandaged limbs. Here, the sword and the cross both rest in trembling hands. And as you look into their faces, you see not sin, but suffering. Not curse, but courage. The more you watch, the more the medieval lie begins to unravel. You notice that many lepers never led sinful lives. That women, children, monks all were struck. That piety did not protect. That charity did not shield. That sin had nothing to do with it. And yet, the myth persists. Because it is easier to punish a person when you believe they deserve it. Easier to build walls when you believe you are defending virtue. Easier to abandon someone when you tell yourself God already has. But deep down, you begin to question. If illness can make a person untouchable, then what does that say about the society that refuses to touch? You watch a child leave bread at the leper's gate. You see a nun slip water through a crack in the wall. You hear songs carried through the wind, from one barred window to another. And in those quiet acts, you witness something unholy crumbling. Not disease, but the illusion that some are unworthy of love. You are in a small chamber of stone, the light from a narrow window falling cold on a table where two figures sit. One bears a cross, the other a seal. Between them lies a ledger not of souls, but of bodies, names, illnesses, destinations. This is not medicine. This is management. And the body they are deciding over is still alive. By the late 13th century, leprosy had moved beyond theology and folklore. It had become policy. Driven by fear, fused with faith, and enforced through state power, leprosy was no longer just a disease, it was a reason to reorganize society. Kings, bishops, and burghers began coordinating to purge towns of visible sickness under the guise of public health. But you quickly learn their motives weren't so pure. You watch as leper houses, once modest refuges on the outskirts of towns, are fortified with high walls and barred gates. They are no longer places of care but holding pens. A leprosarium is built like a monastery but governed like a prison. In France, you read royal decrees ordinances restricting lepers from using public baths, touching bread in markets, or walking the main roads. In England, they are made to carry sticks or wear bells, not for their safety but to warn the clean. And all of this is wrapped in the velvet of moral language. The Church, more than anyone, sanctions this architecture of exile. Bishops write treatises justifying segregation. Papal bulls speak of divine order, as if quarantine was scripture. In 1267 directive from the Council of Rouen, lepers are forbidden from living among the healthy for the sake of both their souls and ours. But you know that souls are not the real concern. Property is. You witness cases in which land owned by a sick man is seized by the crown for safekeeping, never to be returned. You hear whispers of wills altered under pressure, testaments rewritten with trembling hands to divert assets to monasteries or noble sponsors. A sick man cannot protest. A leper, especially, has no legal standing. In this world, the disease doesn't just disfigure the body, it dissolves identity. You meet a woman named Agnes, stripped of her surname after diagnosis. Now she is simply Agnes the leper. Her name is her sentence. In some towns, lepers must undergo a ritual of expulsion. Dressed in a black robe, ashes sprinkled on their head, they are walked to the gates of the city as the priest intones, "I separate thee from the company of the faithful." It is a funeral with no coffin, a death without a body, and the city breathes easier once they're gone. But not everyone is content to stay banished. You read records of lepers returning, breaking curfew, walking among the clean, some out of desperation, others defiance. In 1311, the city of Basel sentences a leper to death not for spreading disease but for refusing to be invisible. And in 1321, fear curdles into full-blown conspiracy. In southern France, rumours spread that lepers, in secret alliance with Jews and Muslims, are plotting to poison wells. Letters are forged, confessions extracted under torture. The result? Mass arrests, executions, a pogrom masked as a purge of the diseased. You see how quickly fear becomes fire. It is a chilling preview of what will come centuries later with witch trials and plagues. And it shows you something you cannot unsee. The sick are always the first scapegoats when power feels afraid. But then, amid this grim machinery, you find a paradox. The leprosariathos, grim institutions built to confine, also become sanctuaries of a strange kind. Some are run not by wardens but by the ill themselves. They elect leaders, share duties, preserve rights. A kingdom of the exiled. In one English leper house, you read a prayer etched into the wall by a monk with only 3 fingers. "Though the world has cast me out, still God knows my name." Some found not just survival, but a community outside of society. You meet those who tend each other's wounds, cook shared meals, sing together at dusk. They turn their sorrow into solidarity. And in that solidarity, there is a kind of defiant seer, quiet rebellion against the system that discarded them. Others find power in piety. In Germany, you read about Brother Anselm, a leper who became a local saint after his death. His grave becomes a place of pilgrimage. Mothers leave swaddled clothes, hoping for protection from disease. Children touch the stones, hoping to be spared. He died alone, but in death, he drew the world near. And you begin to notice something else. The world beyond the walls is not as untouched as it claims. Merchants still trade with lepers, discreetly. Midwives tend to sick children without regard for status. Bakers leave loaves just beyond the gate. Pity, fear, and compassion all tangled in the same moment. And you? You start to feel the weight of your own hands. You once crossed the street at the sound of a leper's bell. Now, you linger at the edge of the wall, unsure. You hold a cup of water. You step forward. And in that single motion, centuries of ritual separation tremble. Because even now, you understand what the church and the crown tried to suppress. That the disease was never as dangerous as the lie that some lives matter less. You are standing in a field where the wind moves gently through tall grass, and the silence feels too complete. The chapel that once belonged to a leper colony stands half buried in moss, its roof long caved in. Beneath your feet, the stones are carved, but time has blurred their names. And it strikes you. Leprosy didn't disappear in a roar. It vanished in a whisper. By the 16th century, something strange begins to happen across Europe. Leper houses scattered across every province begin to empty. Not with ceremony, but neglect. Some are converted into almshouses. Others crumble into ruin. A few are burned. A disease that once defined centuries of fear starts to retreat. But you notice something. No one really understands why. No miracle cure is discovered. No single herb. No divine revelation. The slow fading of leprosy defies the drama of its centuries-long reign. Historians speculate. Perhaps improved nutrition. Changes in human immunity. Competition from deadlier diseases like tuberculosis or syphilis. You walk through these theories like fog. None feel satisfying. In truth, what vanished was not just a bacterium, it was an idea. A social construct. A theological sentence. When plague swept across Europe in the 14th century, killing tens of millions in months, leprosy's slow corrosion of the body was overshadowed. Sudden death replaced slow exile as the dominant fear. Public health shifted from long-term segregation to urgent containment. Leprosy was too slow to terrify anymore, and the institutions built to house lepers? Now relics. Monasteries take over their assets, towns repurpose their land. The same hands that once built walls to keep the sick out now tear them down for timber. You read a decree from Ghent in 1579. The leper house shall be closed, its remaining funds diverted to the care of the poor. Not a word of remembrance, not a ceremony, only administrative closure. Even the language changes. By the 17th century, the term leper loses its theological weight. In English, it becomes metaphor, a social outcast. A leper in court, a leper in love. The disease becomes allegory, no longer reality. But not for everyone. You find, in colonial records, new outbreaks not in Europe, but in the far reaches of empire. In India, the Philippines, the Americas leprosy spreads again, rebranded as Hansen's disease by the 19th century. And this time, it follows the ships of colonizers, carried not by the poor but by doctors, merchants, missionaries. A cruel irony. The very powers that once banished lepers now bring the disease to new lands. You see the pattern return. In Hawaii, the government of King Kamehameha V, under pressure from foreign advisors, establishes a leper colony at Kalaupapa in 1866. Children even are ripped from their homes, shipped to die on the rocky coast of Molokai. Not because the disease is untreatable, but because society still prefers walls. There, you read of Father Damien, a Belgian priest who chooses to live among the sick. He builds homes, cooks food, dresses wounds with his bare hands. For this, he is hailed as a saint. But the fact that he was needed at all speaks volumes. Kalaupapa continues until 1969. Yes, 1969. The last compulsory isolation law in the United States is repealed that year. The colony remains open into the 21st century, because even when the bacterium can be treated with antibiotics, the stigma persists. You realize something chilling. The world forgot leprosy as a public threat, but not as a metaphor. The word still lingers in our mouths like a curse. You see it used in schoolyards, in politics, in exile of a different sort, social, racial, ideological. The idea of the untouchable never quite dies. It simply changes masks. And yet beneath that silence, voices remain. You find journals of doctors who cared for leprosy patients in 19th century Venezuela, letters written by children in Chinese leprosaria to their families in perfect calligraphy, oral histories preserved by anthropologists in Nigeria recounting the healing power of traditional herbs once dismissed as superstition. And here's the most astonishing thing. The disease never left. In 2024, the World Health Organization reports over 174 new cases of Hansen's disease, most in India, Brazil, and Indonesia, some in the southern United States, some among immigrant communities, some ignored, because the old fear still clings. And where fear clings, shame grows. And where shame grows, silence wins. You find a clinic in Bangladesh where a woman hides her diagnosis for months because if her husband finds out, he will leave her. Another in the Philippines where a boy is pulled from school. In Louisiana, a patient is told, "This doesn't happen here," before being correctly diagnosed 3 years too late. The old disease lives on not in its microbe, but in how we treat the body that carries it. And you? You feel something shift. In this silence, this long forgetting, begin to see the outlines of something urgent, a warning that the real plague was not leprosy. It was what we built around it, the walls, the myths, the justifications. And if we forget that, we will build them again. And what remains after the exile ends? You stand at the threshold of a ruined chapel. A stone wall crumbles in the wind. You place your hand upon it and realize, this wall once kept people out, and in. It held prayers and punishments. It witnessed silence too long endured. You close your eyes and listen for echoes. They do not shout, they whisper. I was here. I was human. I was not your myth. History remembers leprosy as a horror of the skin, but what it truly infected was the human gaze. It turned the sick into symbols. It made theology out of bacteria. It cast out the wounded, not because they were dangerous, but because they were inconvenient reminders of mortality, fragility, and care. What if the real disease was our fear of touching what suffers? You ask yourself this, standing in a world that still builds walls. They may look different now, paperwork, borders, diagnosis codes, price tags, but they still divide. They still exile. And the leper? The leper never disappeared. She became the migrant with no country. He became the addict with no clinic. They became the forgotten names in hospital files marked contagious, untreatable, other. You remember them now. The child taken from his mother to live on an island of the dying. The woman made to ring a bell before crossing a street. The man who lived 20 years in a cell built not of crime, but of myth. And you vow something. That history is not only to be read, it is to be heard, held, and when possible healed. Because memory, unlike fear, doesn't exile. And if we remember clearly, then perhaps we can tear down the next wall before it's built. Perhaps next time, the sick won't have to be saints to be seen. Perhaps next time, we'll listen sooner. You take one last look at the leprosarium ruins. You breathe deeply, and you walk away not in fear, but in witness. And now, you too remember. And that is enough to keep them from vanishing forever.